for Community Economic Development here at the Partnership. Welcome to today's webinar, which is another in our series on CCAP. Our speaker today will be Jim Lopresti. I should point out that there will be a follow-up webinar on April 10th. On the certification exam, it will also be at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. I'll now turn things over to Jim Lopresti.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. The CCAP candidacy is a 3-stage assessment process. Our webinar, Assessing Experience, documented in the candidate data form, was presented back in November. This second webinar on the Executive Skills Portfolio is the process for assessing your skills. And then the third webinar, which, as Kevin mentioned, will be presented in April 10th, assesses your knowledge, and that is on the CCAP exam. Well, let's take time now to take a look at the Executive Skills Portfolio, which is the process for assessing candidates' skills. During the course of this webinar, I will be watching the chat box to see any questions that you may have typed in, and will pause at certain times during the course of the presentation, and I will attempt to answer those questions. But I also want to make sure that you know that you will have the opportunity after the webinar to ask any follow-up questions by sending an email directly to me at ccapcontact@aol.com. That email address will again appear on the last slide at the end of this presentation today. So let's take a look at the Executive Skills Portfolio. First of all, a kind of an overview of how it's structured, and then we'll get into the details. The ESP has 2 sections to it. First of all is a sample of work that you have done that will enable you to showcase 2 things: how you have applied your management choices and your leadership skills, and how you have incorporated the vision and values of community action in your work setting in a sample of work that you have done. I will tell you a little bit more about what that means, what kind of work. The second part of the Executive Skills Portfolio is a series of 4 essays in which you will relate that work that you showcase in your work sample to specific parts of the CCAP body of knowledge outline. The ESP is evaluated and scored by a panel of CCAP commissioners and trained CCAP volunteers. That's a team of about 30 people that are involved. And in that process of evaluation, you will be able to earn up to 500 points toward the 700 you need to qualify to take the CCAP examination. You will recall from the previous webinar on the candidate data form that the CDF is also worth up to a maximum of 500 points. So between the points that you earn on the candidate data form and the Executive Skills Portfolio, you must achieve a minimum total of 700 points. However, you also need to achieve a minimum of 300 points on each of them. Your CDF may not fall below the threshold of 300 points, and your Executive Skills Portfolio may not fall under the threshold of 300 points. Now, about that scoring process, it is very labor intensive. In effect, the commissioners and the volunteers will need to read approximately 5,000 pages of material, and they need to come into an agreement on their scoring according to a specialized process. That process of evaluating the candidate's executive skills portfolio submission usually takes about 7 weeks. So candidates do not find the score that they have achieved on their CDF and ESP combined until usually 7 weeks after the date in which the executive skills portfolio is due in the partnership office. That is to say, 7 weeks after February 20th. That's about how long it takes. At that time, you will learn whether you have achieved a sufficient score to move to the examination in June. If you do not achieve the necessary scores, your report will tell you, in fact, what scores you did achieve so that you can determine what you would need to do and where you would need to focus to qualify in the next year.
Jim, we have a request for a little bit louder of a voice.
I think I'll just need to hold the microphone part of my headset closer to my mouth.
That's better.
That's much better. Much better.
Okay. I'll try to keep it there. I'm Italian and my hands move while I talk. My apologies.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Some details now about the work sample itself. First, it must showcase your own work as part of a team or a group effort. It has to be clear what you did as part of that team or part of that group effort. The work you describe may not have ended more than 3 years before the date of your enrollment as a CCAP candidate. So, for example, let's say that your project was to help a team at your agency revise and reform your intake documents, your materials that your program participants and customers use in order to make it more carefully inclusive, more user-friendly, and more appropriate to marginalized communities. Let's say that was your project, and you send in your work sample a description of the meetings you have and the product that came out of that. If that process was completed more than 3 years from the date in which you enrolled as a candidate, it's too old. It may have, but if that process started more than 3 years and it took a couple of years for it to be completed, it counts. It's not when it started, it's when your work was finalized. The third point, in that ESP work sample, it must demonstrate your management choices, how you were involved in planning, organizing, directing, and evaluating this particular project or this work of this committee or group or team that you were involved in. That's what the work sample itself, that's what was required for that work sample. But also, you must attach to that work sample that you submit a document or something that provides the following information. What was the purpose of this work? What were you attempting to accomplish? And what was your particular role in producing the work? What was your function? Now, it is presumed that that function is in some way able to be described as a leadership function, whatever that means, by position you have in the agency or by specific responsibility that you have in a leadership function in regard to that sample. If that sample required administration of a budget for the work, that must be attached to your work sample, and any documents that came from the work that show results. maybe a report, letters, or a newspaper article about this project that your agency had, this new effort this agency had put forward in the community. So those 4 items must appear in a document that's attached to the work sample. Okay, now that's about the work sample itself. But we're going to now take a look at about the essays.
So Jim?
Yes.
There is a question about the work sample, and the question is this: can the work sample be a project that is still in process?
The answer to that will be based on what we look at when we look at the essays, because the essays are going to ask you questions about the work sample. If you can answer those essays and there's sufficient information in the work sample to back up what you say in the essays, then the answer would be yes. But I'm looking at this now piecemeal, first the work sample and then the essays. After we look at the work sample and the essays, that will make more sense. Okay? Did you see anything else, Charity, or can I proceed?
That's it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Let's take a look at the essays that are attached to the sample. These essays require that you are able succinctly to relate your work sample to 3 specific areas in the body of knowledge outline. Now, I'm presuming in this presentation that all of you by now have had the opportunity to download the body of knowledge outline in its 5 categories. That is a description of the core competencies and knowledge expected of a leader in community action. 3 of those areas of the body of knowledge outline, areas B, C, and D, which we'll look at specifically, you must specifically engage in these essays relating to your work sample. In addition to those 3 areas of the body of knowledge outline, and we will look at them, you will have to be able to relate your work sample to the partnership's standards of excellence. Now, in addition, when you do answer these essay questions, when you write your answers, you must refer to specific pages in your work sample as evidence for any claims you make in each of your essays. If you're saying, my essay shows my skill at X, for example, you might put it as a footnote. You might put it in parentheses right next to that claim. The page that your claim about your work sample refers the reader back to the work sample. If you don't add those kind of footnotes or those kind of parentheses leading the evaluator back to your work sample in your essays, you will lose points on your essays and your ESP scores. That is one of the most frequent errors of candidates, and the most frequent ways candidates lose points in the executive skills portfolio. So let's take a look at each of those essays, those 750-word responses. Let's look at the first one. The first essay is on traditional management skills. That is section C of the body of knowledge outline. So, when you're thinking about what work sample you want to pull together, go back to the body of knowledge outline, section C, and see that if those certain topic areas, not all of them, just whatever ones are appropriate, if certain parts of that definition of or list of management skills relates to the sample you're going to showcase. So then, referencing specific pages in your work sample, Explain how the work shows that you understand and can use traditional management practices in the classic areas. How are you involved in planning? How are you involved in organizing, directing, and evaluating? So that's the first of the 4 essays, relating it to management skills, body of knowledge outline, section C. Essay number 2 relates to body of knowledge outline, section D, on leadership skills. And that essay has 2 parts to it. One is, how has your leadership style helped you as a leader in your organization? And how has that style limited your role as a leader in the organization? Or how would it have the potentiality possibly to limit your role as a leader in an organization? Now, leadership theories are quite extensive and quite diffuse. There's no expectation that you're going to respond to any particular kind of leadership skill. But understand that what leaders basically do is leaders are individuals who influence members of individuals in a group to achieve agreed upon goals. So that's a process question. So how has your leadership style helped you influence a group towards getting to a goal that your group agrees on? Maybe your leadership style is more transformational, where you expect your team to go run, take the ball and run with it and exceed expectations. Or maybe your leadership style is much more focused in detail, or whatever it might be. How has that leadership style helped you as a leader in organization in that process? Also, no leadership style is perfect in all circumstances. The commissioners are not looking, and the other evaluators, for you to demonstrate that your leadership style was perfect. They're looking for you to demonstrate that you understand, you can reflect on, you can evaluate, and you are able to objectively evaluate your leadership style. In the essay, they're more interested in your understanding of leadership. Okay, now, remember though, to reference the pages in your work sample when you're talking about your leadership style. Okay? I'm going to move on to the next essay, the body of knowledge, and after I move to that essay, I'm going to open it. I'm going to be taking a look at the chat window and then see if there are questions. Essay number 3 asks you to relate to section B of the body of knowledge and outline, which is the vision and values of community action, to explain how you have understand and have used that vision you have, an understanding of the values of what we do in community action. You're not just leading an organization to answer questions. You're not just managing a project. You're managing a project that forwards the vision and values of community action. Now, as with the other essays, you are expected to show where in your work sample the claims that you're making your essay make that claim visible. But here it's more specified. You will find when you go to the partnership website, which I'm supposing many of you already have, and you go look for the guidelines for developing an executive skills portfolio, you'll see that those guidelines include, I have a picture of it here on this slide, a cross-reference check sheet. That cross-reference check sheet is the specific way in which you relate your essay on the vision and values of community action to your work sample from the body of knowledge outline to your work sample. So here you see on that page on the right-hand side of the slide the 22 items that appear in the body of knowledge outline on section B. And you see I put blue arrows to show a sample of where a candidate might have indicated pages in the work sample. Interestingly, as simple as that sounds, we've had candidates who, instead of referencing pages in the work sample, referenced pages of their essay. It's a reference to the page in the work sample about that particular, what you think your work shows. For example, this particular work sample, the person writing the essay said that on pages 7, 19, and 22, their work showed community action identifies and addresses the cause of poverty, because this particular work sample and that candidate says on page 7, 19, and 22, you can see how this work is identified and addressed the causes of poverty. And you can see, there you see under number 12, anti-poverty initiatives must be related to assess community needs. Our work sample shows how we used our community needs assessment for the work description of the work that follows in the work sample. A caution about using this cross-reference check sheet. Some candidates make the mistake, I should just mark everything and show everything on the vision and values. That would be a mistake, because what you need to balance here is to make sure that there's a robust connection between that vision and values that you're pointing out your work sample relates to. Don't get the idea, well, if I just mention them all, my evaluators will find some of them. That will lose points for you because they're evaluating each one of them and how robust the connection is. So it's not a matter of connecting a lot of them. It's a matter of balance. Connect to certain ones that really are visible in your work sample. That provides you a better score than trying to say that you covered them all. So there are some candidates who overreach. That's another one of the reasons some candidates don't score well, or I shouldn't put it that way. Candidates lose points on their executive skills portfolio, correlating their essay to the work samples. Now we've taken a look at the 3 essay questions that relate to the body of knowledge outline. I'll look at the 4th one in just a moment. I'm over at the chat window. I don't see, mine has frozen.
All right, so we do have some chats. One is the work sample an actual document that was submitted, or can it be a narrative of a project you've implemented?
It can be, it doesn't have to be an actual document. It can be a narrative, but if the narrative is referring to specific activities, for example, meetings or something, the more data or information you can connect to it, the better. For example, if you have meeting minutes, or if you have important email messages that can be made like appendix to your narrative. The point is this: you want to make the work that you did visible to the person evaluating it. So you're saying, for example, let's say we pulled together a group of people that wanted to make sure that our annual report, we use it as a way of communicating the value of community action and the outcomes of community action in the community. And so we pulled together a number of people who represent the low-income community that have had an impact on their lives, and we had a series of focus groups with them to say, all right, give us some narrative. This report needs some real things that will move people. And so you collected some narratives. So you write up the report of that focus group, and you append it to your, as an appendix to your narrative about that effort to do a public relations piece for the sake of advocacy. So it doesn't have to be, the work sample can be as creative as you can make it. Just make sure that it's not just in your head. It's visible in some way to the evaluators, some way that they can see what you're talking about. And we've had a lot of different creative ways people have done that. I hope that's a helpful answer. By the way, if it's not, and if you need more information, please remember you can always email me afterwards to get more information about that. However, I can address the process of it. If you're concerned about the topic itself and the content of it, that's something you need to discuss with a CCAP mentor or someone who is a CCAP in your community to give you more guidance about the content of what you're considering.
There are questions about that coming in. One is, are we able to reference examples beyond the scope of the specific work samples we choose for the ESP? If so, how do we provide those examples?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is about. If you want to remember, part of the submission of the portfolio includes, besides the work sample, remember attached to it is a document about a reports or outcome. That might be that area. So if there's impact statements, for example, of someone reporting on the impact of your work, if that's what you mean, that can be appended as part of the results of your work. Yes. But again, don't overreach. Don't flood the evaluators with a lot of information. If it's salient, if it's valuable, if it's an important pointer to the impact or the effect of the work, yes, attach it. But you don't have to snow the evaluators with a lot of information. Just whatever is important to get your point across about the work that you did and that it's visible. We used to say, because it was all submitted by typed pages, to keep it to a 50-page minimum, the whole package. Have that kind of in your head. If this were done as an actual portfolio where you're presenting, would it look like a 50-page portfolio? That's a good kind of a way to assess, am I sending too much information? I hope that's helpful. We don't, by the way, we no longer say that because nobody is sending us portfolios in printed pages, typed out and circulated. They're all done, obviously by digital submission. Other questions, Charity?
Yes, there is a question about this essay section, and it says, in the essay section, writing about our leadership style, it may go beyond the scope of our work sample.
Oh, no, well, yes, the leadership, I'm sorry. Yes, if you're, the scope, particularly the question about what limitations might be of your leadership style, because we anticipate that in most instances, someone's going to say that this is how my leadership style helped to produce the positive work. It's harder to say, and this was the problem of my leadership style in this particular work. That being said, however, my leadership style in another kind of a work setting would have limitations for reasons X, Y, and Z if it were a different kind of a project. That would make a lot of sense because your point is you're trying to demonstrate to your evaluator that you understand leadership style and you're able to critically reflect on it. So it would be expected that that would be a good example of going beyond your work sample in your essay around leadership style. Yes. Hope
The last,
okay?
yes. The last question is about the examples. So one person wanted to make sure would meeting minutes or copies of emails be submitted as examples?
Yes, they can be. But remember, don't just submit them as a kind of a folder. Submit them in a way, in a narrative that makes sense. So that if you've got, for example, a series of emails, maybe you want to put them together in a narrative between them and create and scan them into one document. So that the more organized, one of the things that the evaluators look for is good organization and good communication in the portfolio. They evaluate that. So when you're putting it together, organize it in a way that it makes a good presentation. Again, think if you were doing this in an actual portfolio that you were handing in a binder to a grant reviewer, it has to make sense in its sequencing. Consider if you were an evaluator reading this that knew absolutely nothing about this project except what you're telling that evaluator, make it as clear as possible about if you're using memos, why is that memo in that sample on that particular page in the sample? Make sure that there's a clarity about flow and organization and headings and what follows what. Make sense? Okay.
That's it so far. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Let's move then to the next essay. And the next and fourth and final essay is to demonstrate how your work sample contributes to your agency's attainment or enhancement of one of the partnership standards of excellence, or how it has the capacity to contribute to that standard. Again, remember to reference pages. Now, it is expected that someone who wants to be designated as a certified community action professional has more than just a siloed understanding of what the work I do in my part of my agency is, what that's about. That one understands that my work in my agency affects the agency as a whole in some way, or could affect the agency in a whole in some way, or improves what we do as an agency, in some way measured over a marker of excellence that we would like to achieve. So that means the candidate should carefully look at the partnership's standards of excellence and look at what is contained in there. You don't have to all look at every single one of the 32 subheadings of that. If you look specifically at one standard is enough, and say that this standard, this work could enhance my agency's getting better about this, or could get us to a better place in regard to this. Okay? So it takes, what I suggest to most candidates is before you choose your work sample, think about the essays you need to write, look at the standards of excellence, look at the body of knowledge outline, think about the work that you do, and then choose. And then get a CCAP, or your CCAP mentor if you have one, or a member of your study group if you belong to one, to talk with you and look at that sample and help you to write those, not to write them, help you to research and think about those essays. Okay? The essay writing should be your own. Okay, so that's the standards of excellence then are the last of the items that you are expected to relate your work sample to. Okay? We're going to talk about more guidance about the submission in total in a moment. Let me ask, though, Charity, before I move on to that section about the actual submission process, to see if there are any other questions that arrived in the chat box.
Nope, you're good to go.
Okay. So, about the submission. First of all, make sure that you refer to specific pages in your work sample when you answer your questions about it. You don't have to relate to everything. Make sure it's a robust relationship, most especially using that mandatory worksheet for Essay 3. A reminder that that mandatory worksheet for Essay number 3 is part of the ESP guidelines document. That's on the partnership's website on the CCAP page. If you haven't gone to that page, it's important you do it right after this webinar, and go to the partnership website to the CCAP related documents and pull down that page to read the guidelines. Next, and it includes, by the way, that vision and values worksheet, which itself is a fillable PDF. Second, if the evaluator cannot determine what you did, the part that you did or your part in the team's effort, your work sample will be disqualified and not scored. Just be clear in your description in your additional pages attached to it that you can describe what your role is. And if the evaluator cannot determine the work was done within that 3-year required time limit, your ESP will be disqualified. So make sure that that's also clear, however you make it visible in your portfolio. Now, the format. This is the sequencing of how this material should be put together. First, the descriptive materials. What was the purpose of this work? What was your role in the work? The budget. Any documents or reports on results that you want to attach to the work. Then the document that describes the work, and finally the 4 essays. Now, when you submit it, it is important that, we have not had anyone submit by surface delivery a typed up document in a number of years. Though that option still exists, if it's necessary, and if there's a reason that's necessary, please contact me at CCAP Contact to tell me about that so I can give you more guidance about it. But if materials are submitted by hard copy and surface delivery, that will slow down the process for everyone. So we anticipate then that the documents will be submitted mostly by attachment to email to ccapcontact@aol.com. Again, I will show you that email address on the last slide. And when you're putting it together, please do not send 7 or 8 or 9 separate documents. Scan them together into one document and submit. It can be up to 20 megabytes to be one document. If you have a work sample that is heavily laden with graphics and therefore might be even larger, you do have the option of depositing it in Dropbox and then sending a link to Dropbox, that Dropbox to that email address. I suggest using Dropbox because that is the format by which the evaluators communicate. Their reading of portfolios and their submitting of their evaluation forms. So preference, attach the whole document unless it's larger than 20 MB to AOL.com. You may, if it's necessary, divide it up into 3 documents, but please no more than that. I say that because they have to be cataloged and then sent on to the evaluators and put in Dropbox. If you do have to send that, for example, in 3 separate documents, make sure that you say ESP Joe Smith 1 of 3, ESP Joe Smith 2 of 3, ESP Joe Smith 3 of 3. You will get within 72 hours of submission of your portfolio an acknowledgement message from CCAP contact at AOL.com that your portfolio has been received. If within 7 days you have not received that message, send an email message. Sometimes it happens that ESPs wind up in spam. The spam folder is checked frequently. But that being said, on the due date, February 20th, that's when almost every ESP comes in. So that box is jammed on that day. It's not uncommon to have 30 or 40 ESPs show up on that day. And in fact, we anticipate if it's a usual year, there will be over 100 ESPs that need to be evaluated. So if you do not get a message saying that your portfolio has been received, send an email message to CCAPcontact at AOL.com saying, I have not received confirmation. Especially that is important if you've used Dropbox. We make every effort to make sure everything has been located. Okay? Again, the ESP guidelines are located on the partnerships website and on the CCAP page. And on the guidelines itself, what I just said about the process of submitting the document through email is repeated in section D of those guidelines in more detail. So you'll be able to read what I just said in those guidelines. Okay. Now, some of you may not have listened to the previous webinars. They have been archived. The one that is an orientation to the CCAP, I can see by the list of attendants, it looks like there's some people who are actually new to CCAP looking at this webinar. I don't recognize a certain few names on that list. I don't have your documents yet. So if you need to go to those previous webinars, on October 17th, the orientation or the candidate data form, you'll see that they are archived. And today's will be archived, and you can listen to it again in the near future. The webinar on the examination will be webcast on Wednesday, April 10th. Some more things about help. Remember, candidacy lasts for 3 years. About half of candidates complete it in the first year. Many take the full 3 years to build points. I want to note that the most complex part of the process is the executive skills portfolio. That's the section of the candidacy process that takes the most initiative and creativity on the part of the candidate. So many times it's a candidate not quite making that 300-point minimum threshold. That means that sometimes a candidate may need to revise an executive skills portfolio in another year. When you get a report, and if you get the report that you have not achieved a sufficient score on the portfolio, you'll have an opportunity to engage more in terms of where you might be able to get at least a report on scoring deficiencies, not on content. That can't be given. That has to be between you and a mentor, but where scores were a problem. The program is designed to provide opportunities for persons who come up through the ranks, as well as those who are new to community action. But it does presume the person's ability to be articulate about leadership, management, the vision and values of community action, and the understanding of the standards of excellence. There is help. All the forms you need are on the partnership website. You have the opportunity to have a mentor to be available to you. The study guide for the exam will be published by the end of January. The exam was just for 2019 was just approved by the CCAP Commission Examination Committee about a week ago, and the study guide is being developed right now. Question. The CCAP, we hope, belongs after your name. We hope that this is the picture from Denver last year, the 25th anniversary CCAP class. We look forward to welcoming many of you who choose to follow through and are successful to become CCAPs in the Partnerships Convention this August in Chicago, or maybe the following year in Seattle. At the bottom of this page, you see the email address to which you can address any further questions about the ESP or the CCAP process. This is also the email address to submit your portfolio. I check that email address frequently every day, and I do my best to respond to those messages within 24 hours. It gets to be a crunch around actual deadlines. For example, the candidate data form, as most of you know, is due on this coming Wednesday, February 23rd. There will be a lot of emails on that date, but I do promise you I get to them as quickly as possible to respond to messages and your questions. I have two responsibilities. One is to assist the commissioners in their task of evaluating CCAP candidates, and my second task is to assist CCAP candidates in understanding the CCAP process and becoming successful candidates. Let me check to see, do you find any new questions in our question box, Charity?
Nope. No new questions.
Okay. Again, I welcome any further questions that you might have by email message, and look forward to connecting with you many times in the future, and for that wonderful opportunity of being able to congratulate you in person at a future partnership annual convention. Thank you so much for spending this hour with me.
Thank you, everyone. Best wishes on your CCAP endeavors.